Hello and welcome. Today I want to show you guys how to set up version control, change management, that kind of thing for your Ren'Py project. Now, this isn't restricted to Ren'Py projects. You could follow these steps for any type of game project or even just any folder on your computer at all, actually. Um, but this video is going to be focused on Ren'Py specifically, just because I think it's an entry point for a lot of people just getting into development. I know it was for me. So we're gonna focus on Ren'Py projects today, but feel free to try to apply these steps to anything else. It does work best for like code or text files. Um, it will not work so well for like a lot of proprietary file types. Like it can recognize what we're using today, Git. It can recognize changes at a high level for like Word documents or spreadsheets, PDFs, you name it. It can recognize that the file changed and keep track of it, but it won't give you that like line by line, here's exactly what changed in the way that it will for code. So I spoiled it a bit in the intro, but what we're going to be using to track changes to our project is something called Git. Git, which is a version control system, very widely used. I've used it in pretty much every development job I've ever had. It's everywhere. It's a really, really good skill to know, is to learn how to use Git. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So step one is to install Git. Now, if you have a Linux or Mac computer, you probably already have it installed, so feel free to skip to step two. If you're on a Windows computer, you have two options. The first option is to install something called Git for Windows. I will link this URL in the description, but basically you're going to go to this website, you're going to click here to download, pretty standard stuff. And once it is downloaded, it's just an exe file. You'll install it just like any other. Windows may ask you to allow it. Yes, it's fine. And you're just going to do the usual install the thing. I've installed this before, so it says it already exists. That's fine. Most of the default things are fine. And we're going to continue on with that. I personally do prefer to use Vim. This is the editor you're going to use to update like commit messages and things. Visual Studio Code is a very common option. I'm personally going to stick with Vim. I don't think it's that difficult to use. And there's some history here where default branches used to be called master, but there was a push a few years ago to try to move away from slave language in software development. So a lot of people will now use main as the like default branch. So we're gonna go ahead and do that because that's just that saves us a step. And sure, recommended is fine. And that's fine too. Yep. 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 So this is going to install a new terminal, basically, that makes it a little easier to use Git as opposed to the Windows default console, which is not great. Yeah, that's probably fine. Sure. Sure. And once that's installed, it's going to install this Git bash program. And when you open that up, it's just a terminal window. And this is that thing it was asking you if you wanted to install or not. So this will be useful. This is where you'll type all of your Git commands. So what I just did, I just said Git and it gave me a bunch of instructions on how to use it, basically. Option 2 is a little more fancy, a little more advanced, but it is my preference. And that is to install Linux on Windows with something called Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL. Basically installs a little Linux machine on your Windows computer, which is really good, especially if you are doing a lot of development and need to install a lot of like development packages and things. It's so much easier to install those things on Linux than on Windows. I don't know why that is, it just is. And it's pretty easy to enable. You're just gonna run PowerShell can be open just, normally Windows PowerShell. And it looks like this. It's just a terminal window. You might need to run as administrator to make sure you have the right permissions. Oh yeah, it does say that in administrator mode. So you'll run this, restart your computer, and the first time you launch it, it will ask you for some things, some information. You'll configure some things like your default user. It will install Ubuntu by default. This is fine. That's usually all you need. And once that installs, it's going to create this little Linux directory, drive, whatever you want to call it. It's a menu item when you go to your file explorer, and you can open it up and go to Ubuntu. And generally your home directory is going to be under home, and then your username that you set up when you create the Linux machine. And that's where all your files would be. So step 2 is to create your Ren'Py project. And you can use an existing project for this as well, but I'm going to create a new one. But first, I just want to show that if you are using WSL, you will want to go into Ren'Py and update your projects directory to point to WSL localhost and a file in that home directory that we just looked at. And that's where all your projects will go, and that way you'll have access to Git, assuming that that's the direction you went in. So we are just going to create a new project and continue. We're just gonna call this Git tutorial, sure. All the default settings are fine. I'm not concerned about it. So my Ren'Py project has been created. We're going to open the project. And by default, for most of you, this is probably just going to open in Visual Studio Code. Now, mine opened this little notification that said like, hey, you should use the WSL window. We're going to go ahead and do that. That's fine. Okay, so now we've got our Ren'Py project. You can see it over here. And sorry if this UI is really small for you. We're going to go up to terminal and new terminal. And so remember that Git bash terminal we were looking at earlier? This is the exact same thing. Now, in my case, I am already using bash because I'm connected to my WSL. But if I had a different Ren'Py project open, let's just open one of my older projects. This one actually opened a PowerShell terminal. So you'll want to go over to this little arrow next to the plus sign and open up a Git bash terminal instead. And so this is going to be equivalent to this guy over here. So all the same commands should be available. If we open up Git there, we've got all that. And if we open up Git here, we've got all the same stuff. All right. And that's just how to like open this within Visual Studio. You can do the same exact thing by opening up a new window and navigating to the project folder with CD, which is change directory. I'm not going to do that because I don't need to, but just letting you know that you don't have to use Visual Studio Code. It just makes life easier. All right, so we have Git installed, we have our project. Next thing you need to do is actually initialize Git for your project. So the first thing you're going to do is you want to configure your name and your email address, which I probably already have configured, but I'll do it again. Your name and your email will show up on every commit that you make. So it's going to be really obvious who made the commit. Now, if you're only doing this on your own computer, you're the only one using it, that's probably less useful, but you'll see why it might be more useful later on. This global flag means that these configuration options are going to be applied globally to any project where you have Git initialized, not just this one. Next, we're going to type git init, and that's short for initialize. And that's what's going to start Git in this particular project folder. It says initialized empty Git repository in this folder. It's not going to show up in Visual Studio Code because it's a hidden folder, but that's where all of your changes are actually going to be tracked. You'll notice that in the Explorer here, a bunch of our folders and files here turned green. And if you hover over it, it says untracked. So this is Visual Studio giving you a visual indication that hey, you've added these things according to Git. You'll notice that some of these are white, and that's because they're empty. And by default, Git does not track empty folders. So it's ignoring these. We can force it to track these by adding a new file called .gitkeep. And now it recognizes that these files were added as far as Git is concerned. You can also see down at the bottom here, it knows that we are on the main branch, and we can do some stuff through the UI here. I'm actually going to use the terminal window for all of the Git commands, but you can use the UI if you so desire. The first thing I'm going to do specifically for, again, this is a Ren'Py project, I'm going to create a new file called .gitignore. And these are going to be a list of files that we don't want Git to track. Maybe because they're computer specific or they're auto-generated, so we don't really need to save them. I'm just going to copy and paste my usual list. I'll include this in the description or a link to this in the description, but here's the basic list of things that I typically ignore for a Ren'Py project. The VS Code directory, that's this guy. It just sets some settings that are usually like specific to you. And it's auto-generated, so it's not really code that you have written that you care about. I generally ignore like the log, errors, trace back. These are not important. If you needed to like back up this project, you wouldn't need any of those. They would be auto-generated again. Same thing with cache and saves, just more auto-generated stuff. You really don't need to save those from, computer to computer. Same thing with these three file types, rpyc, rpymc, and bak, which this one's literally backup. These are just auto-generated files. You don't need to save them. And then this asterisk dot file extension means I want to ignore every file. The asterisk means all. I want to ignore every file with this extension in the name. And you can see over here in the Explorer, now some files and folders have turned gray, and that means that they are being ignored. So the next step is to git add, and we're going to do dot for the current directory. And that's going to add everything that is in the current directory to Git, so it will be tracked. And we always want to confirm our changes with git status. And you can see that it says we added all these new files. And up here, it tells us that we're on branch main. So remember during that Git Windows setup, it asked us what we want our default branch name to be. If you didn't install Git with Windows, if you already had it because you're on Mac or Linux or WSL, the way to do that alternatively is git branch -M main, and that will tell it that that's your default branch. Now, Git is pretty good about telling you what command to run if you ran the wrong thing at the wrong time. It'll be like, hey, did you mean this other thing? And the answer is almost always yes. So if you try to do the thing and it says, hey, did you mean this other thing? You should probably try running that other thing. All right, so assuming we are at the point where we've added the current directory. So we're saying, okay, take all of these changes that have been made to the current directory and stage them for commit. So a commit is like it's like a save point. It's going to create a history of different versions so we can revert to any one of those versions at any time. And you'll see how that works in a second. So now that we've added our files to commit, we're going to do git commit -m for message. And we're going to type a brief description of what this commit is supposed to represent. So normally if it's the first one, I just type initial commit. And you can use single quotes or double quotes generally. Either one will work in most cases. The exception is if you needed to include like a variable in your commit message, then you might need double quotes, but this will be fine. All right, and we can see that it's considered all those things created. On the left, all of those things that we just added are now white. The ignored files are still gray. And if we do git status again, nothing to commit, working tree clean. So all of our changes so far are tracked in Git. And now we've got a clean slate. So let's say I now work on my script. And I add a new line. Notice how in Visual Studio Code, these lines that were added are highlighted in green. You can click on this and you can see exactly what changed. And from here, it's really easy. You could stage it, which is like that git add. You could revert the change just like that. Magically, it's gone. I just did a Control Z to undo that. I can flip between multiple changes, or I can just close that dialog. So Visual Studio Code recognizes that we made some changes, and you can also see it in the Explorer. It's marked with an M for modified. And if we do git status in our terminal window, we can see that Git is now tracking that change, saying, hey, you've modified this file. You could use git add to stage it for commit, or you can do git restore to discard those changes. So let's go ahead and commit this change just to show how that would work. So I am once again going to git add dot for the current directory. I could instead specify this file specifically or this directory specifically. So I could do git add game, and it would add all files that have been changed within that directory. If we do git status again, we can see that this change has been staged for commit. If we wanted to undo that, it tells us exactly what command to run for that. But we're going to continue on. We're going to commit this change. And I'm going to say add new line of dialogue. This description is really for your benefit, so it makes sense to make it sort of descriptive of what the change was. And it's just kind of convention to use a present case, like this is what this commit does, as opposed to here's what I did as a developer. But it's really up to you, especially if it's just on your computer. Okay, we committed that. And now if we do git log, we can see a history of our changes. So we started out with our initial commit, which was made by me with this name and this email address. That's where those configured username and user email come into play. It tells me exactly when that commit was made. And we have our new commit. Again, shows us who made the commit, when it was made, and why. And so let's say we did not like this new dialogue line that was added, and we actually want to go back to a previous version. There are a lot of different ways to go about that, and you can Google it. You can find probably a dozen different ways to go about that. But since we're trying to keep it simple here, a really easy way to do it is git reset head in capitals. Oh, I forgot. I think I have to tell it how many. Okay. So yeah, this one didn't do anything, but when I told it one commit, it updated our log, so we only have the initial commit again. And you'll see it says unstaged changes after reset. So it's gone back to, it thinks this is a new change. And now we can get rid of that change. Once again, there are a few different ways to do it. We can do, we can do git check out this file. Just copied and pasted it there. And notice that erased our changes. What that does is sets it back to whatever it is that was committed. So that's just one easy way to revert back to a previous change. There are, again, a dozen different ways to do it. There are a dozen different ways to do pretty much everything with Git. But the good news is so many people use it. There are so many resources online. You can just Google whatever problem you're having, and there'll be a bunch of different answers that will help you get to where you need to be. So one more thing I want to show you. This isn't a how to use Git video so much as a how to use it with Ren'Py video. But one more thing I want to show you that's just like basic Git functionality is this idea of branches. So branches are basically different versions of the code that represent like different environments. So typically the main branch is like your production environment. It's the default state of your code. But when you're testing something, when you just want to try something out, what you can do is git checkout -b for branch, and then some branch name, let's say rename Eileen. Sure, okay. So it says we switch to a new branch. And if I do a git log, you can see we have the same commit history as we had on main. And it says our head, that's like where we currently are on the Git tree, is pointed to rename Eileen, that branch, but it is the same as the main branch. But let's rename this character. We'll call her Annie, and we'll do a find and replace of, oh boy. That was a terrible idea. Well, the variable can stay the same, I guess. But we'll replace that one. Sure. Okay. So we made some changes. Once again, our changes are recognized over here. Before we had a little green line to show that lines had been added. This time we have a little blue line to show us that lines have been changed. And this does not work very well in with it super zoomed in. But it's trying to show us exactly what changed. And it's this highlighted part here. And same thing down here. The highlighted part. And if we do git status, you'll see that we've made some changes. We can commit these changes. So now we have this new commit on rename Eileen that has this, it's a new commit, right? That has these changes. But you'll notice that now it is different from main. So the main branch is still sitting at this commit, but the rename Eileen branch has this new commit. And if I want to switch back to what I was working on before, I can do git checkout main, and I'll see how this just instantly went back to the previous version that is in the main branch where Eileen is named Eileen. So super cool, super useful for keeping track of your changes, and it will save you so much time and headaches from, you know, having a great idea about this crazy change to make, and then you spend 5 hours on it and realize, oh crap, this isn't gonna work. And now I have to try to undo everything that I just did. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. Never again. Use Git. It's amazing. All right, so you've got your Ren'Py project, you're tracking your changes. Now, what if you wanted to back up your code to a remote server or work with other developers remotely? Well, That's where solutions such as GitHub and GitLab come in. So these are places where you can upload your Git repositories. You can make them public or private, so that you can see them. They provide a way to back up your code on the cloud, so that you always have access to it, regardless of what computer you're on. If something happens to your computer, your code is backed up already, and it's great. So, GitHub and GitLab are both pretty similar, but have some different use cases. GitHub tends to be better for public open source projects. It's owned by Microsoft, so it can kind of interface with some of those capabilities provided by Microsoft. GitLab tends to be better for like large enterprise organizations because it offers self-hosting. I like it because you can organize your repositories into groups, which you can't do with GitHub on the free version. But both of them allow you to create both public and private repositories. So it's really just a preference thing. I'd say GitHub has been around longer. It's a bit better known. But again, I tend to prefer GitLab. That's what I use for my personal projects. Either one will work. So you'll want to create an account. I'm not going to go through this process, but just trust me, it exists. Same thing for GitLab. You'll need to sign in and then register now. Go through a very similar process. So once you've gotten yourself set up with either GitHub or GitLab, you can create a new repository. I'll call this Ren'Py Git tutorial. You can make it public or private. Because I'm assuming that you're starting with a Ren'Py project that you already generated, you do not want to initialize the repository with any of these options. Don't do it. You can always add these files afterwards. So create repository. And then this is why you should not initialize it with any of those other things. It will give you these instructions, which is super useful. It will tell you exactly what you need to do. You'll recognize some of this, right? Git init, we did that. Git add, git commit, first commit, we did that. Git branch -m main to make sure that that's our default branch, did that. Now this git remote add origin, oh actually, you're mostly looking for this guy, the push an existing repository from the command line. So again, we already did most of that. So here's the relevant bit. You need to add this origin, and then you can push to it, and that will push those files that are in your repository here, the tracked files, not the ignored files. It will push those to this repository here. Now, there does need to be some more setup if you want to do this. If you want to use it like this, you will need to set up some SSH keys. So you can go to your profile, settings, and then SSH keys. And there's generally a link to some documentation on how to actually add those SSH keys. Follow the documentation, follow the instructions. I'm not going to do it here because I've already done it, and I've found out the hard way that you can't add SSH keys for like multiple users or anything without it being very angry. So once you have your SSH keys set up, we will go back here, copy and paste this thing that it told us to copy and paste. And we'll do that. And now we can actually push this code. So we're going to do git push -u for set upstream. U is for upstream. Origin main. And again, Git is really good about telling you when you did something wrong. So if you do just git push, it might actually work, but if it doesn't, it'll tell you what command to run. Yeah, here. So I tried to just do git push without any of the fancy stuff, and it's like, hey, do this. And so the -u that I did before is just a shortcut and alias for this set upstream. But we can copy and paste this and get to the same result. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And now we should be able to refresh and see it here. How exciting. And all of our files should be here. And now I've got my game backed up in the cloud, accessible from any computer as long as I set up the SSH keys. Alternatively, if you don't want to deal with the SSH keys, you can also switch over to HTTPS, and that will clone using the web URL as it says there. And so then it'll just ask you for like your username and password as opposed to having to set up the SSH keys. But I would definitely recommend using SSH keys. Makes life a lot easier, so you don't have to type in your password every single time. You just say, here's a certificate that is unique to my computer. I'm me, so let me in. And it says, oh, sure, okay. All right, so there you go. That was a super quick rundown of how to use Git with a Ren'Py project. Let me know if you run into any issues or have any questions. I'll be happy to answer those in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you, and let me know in the comments if there's anything else you would like to see tutorials on.